I don't believe it. It makes no sense. There is something so strange. Perhaps you can suggest some fantastic explanation. Couldn't it be this sort of thing? He turned the drawing around. Yes, she said. That is what I mean. This was the first explanation of the splitting of the atom. Robert Oppenheimer said, impossible. But within 15 minutes, he decided it was real. He realized it would release a great amount of energy, that you could generate power and make bombs. Within a week, on Oppenheimer's blackboard, there was a crude drawing of the bomb. Enrico Fermi stood in his office and looked out over Manhattan. He cupped his hands to the size of a tennis ball. A little bomb like that, he said, and it would all disappear.
There is no doubt in my mind, if terrorists had acquired a nuclear weapon, they would not have hesitated to use it. So I guess the question is, could they ever get one? Al-Qaeda is determined to acquire nuclear weapons, and to use them if they get them. In the early 90s, they tried to buy highly enriched uranium in the Sudan. They got scammed. Just prior to the 9/11 attacks, we do know that Osama bin Laden and his lieutenant, Zawahiri, sat down with 2 Pakistani nuclear scientists and discussed nuclear weapons. Before releasing the sarin gas on the Tokyo subway, the Japanese called Shinrikyo attempted to acquire a nuclear bomb in Russia. They bought a sheep farm in Australia to mine uranium to build their own bomb.
the objective of al-Qaeda is to, quote, kill 4 million Americans, including 2 million children. This is, in his calculation, what's required to balance the scales of justice. He takes various incidents from Shatila to the war in Iraq and counts up the body count and says that's how many people we're owed, 4 million. You're not going to get to kill 4 million people by hijacking airplanes and crashing them into buildings.
Actually, I'm not that worried about nuclear weapons.
It's not one of my main worries.
I do not worry about nuclear weapons.
恐怖分子要有核武器就很担心。
Isn't everybody worried about nuclear war? That's a stupid answer.
Не дай бог чего, случайно даже.
I don't know, it just has never been something that I've actually had to think about in my everyday life.
美国拥有那么多核武器，那么多核弹，它一炸，好，全世界、全地球都没了。
It might, get on your conscience for a couple days maybe, and then it kind of just disappears.
那认定了，那玩意儿躲都躲不了那东西。
I don't think anybody is going to use in this day and age. Ridiculous, even think about it.
What can you do? Nothing.
At the end of the day, it's one button, and there's going to be a big mess at the end of it, isn't there?
Somebody's going to make a mistake one day, and we're all going to suffer for it.
There are 3 ways to acquire a nuclear weapon. You could steal a bomb, you could buy a bomb, and you could build a bomb.
Of all the things I learned after 9/11 about terrorism intent, the most startling discovery for me personally was realizing that they were trying to build a bomb.
The hardest part of making a nuclear bomb is getting the material, the highly enriched uranium or plutonium. Many countries have these materials, and often they are poorly guarded. But if I were a terrorist intending to build a nuclear bomb, and I wanted to blow up a major city, I would look to the countries of the former Soviet Union. There have been many cases involving the theft of highly enriched uranium or plutonium. And every time there has been a black market seizure of stolen HEU or plutonium, and they were able to track it back to its source, it came from Russia.
There was a case at a Russian naval base in the early 1990s. One of the naval personnel told a relative of his where the highly enriched uranium at this base was. This relative walked through a gaping hole in a security fence, walked up to what you and I would consider to be a tool shed, snapped the padlock with an iron bar. He set off no alarm. He was not detected at all. The Russian military prosecutor in that case said, quote, potatoes were guarded better. At a facility called Luch, where they fabricate fuel made from highly enriched uranium. There was a worker there who knew that as long as the output was within about 3% of the input, they figured it was normal losses to waste, and they didn't bother to investigate. So he kept stealing small amounts of highly enriched uranium day after day over a long period of time.
Надо было холодильник, плиту газовую поменять, инфляция, зарплата не догоняет ее, и никогда я не могу не купить ничего. Мне хотелось купить необходимые вещи, а дальше нормально, честно работать.
Eventually, he stole 1.5 kilograms of 90% enriched, highly enriched uranium. He set off no alarms, no one noticed. He had friends who were making their living stealing car batteries. And they said, maybe the guy in Moscow who buys our stolen car batteries will buy your stolen uranium. So they went down to the train station together, and the police came and arrested the car battery thieves, and he got arrested along with them. That's the only way he was ever caught.
We have cases in which People from the Russian nuclear arsenal were selling material, and they were captured. We have cases in which people from Russian nuclear labs were selling material. They were captured.
Almost all of those cases, until the material was seized, it had never been noticed to be missing.
All the black market seizures that I'm aware of were serendipitous. They were caught by luck. So that we don't know whether it's the iceberg or the tip of the iceberg.
Once you've managed to acquire highly enriched uranium, you'd need to smuggle it out of the country.
Georgia is located along Russia's southern border. A natural corridor, and things like highly enriched uranium could be smuggled through such a place on their way to Azerbaijan, Iraq, Iran, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and so on and so forth.
When we started, we discovered that this was the real paradise for smugglers of all types. In the June of 2003, a smuggler was captured 180 grams of highly enriched uranium. Final place of destination, Istanbul. August the 1st, 2006, someone tried to smuggle nearly 1 kilo of so-called yellow cake. In January 2007, we captured a person who tried to sell to a Turkish buyer 14 grams of uranium. The so-called Hintsagov deal started in the end of 2005, when we first time received an information that a person named Oleg wanted to sell 100 grams of uranium for $1 million.
The Georgians invented a so-called man of Turkish nationality who said he was a Muslim man representing a serious organization. Oleg Hintsagov believed he was selling highly enriched uranium to make an atomic weapon to terrorists.
У меня профессий много, но я и по ремонту автомашин работал, и на техстанции работал. Ну, во-первых, мне нравится Lamborghini, Jaguar. Ну, я люблю вообще шикарные машины и большие машины. У меня был Buick Special Luxe, американский.
The thing I am afraid of and strongly dislike is that Hintsagov promised to sell additional 2 kilos of material. I am afraid that there is really a place in which 2 kilos of stolen material still lies and waits for its potential buyer.
Постоянно мы смотрели по телевизору, даже вот как вторая башня, первая упала, как вторая, как вот таранили. Это все показывали прямой репортаж. Ну, это, конечно, невинные люди погибли. Невинные, но террористов во всем мире это тоже сами создали американцы. Того же Бен Ладена сами создали. Того же талибов сами обучали в горах Шотландии. Они их сами учили. И против них повернули, потому что они видели, что зло откуда идет.
If a truck driver can get a hold of it, a small-time hustler who just wanted to become a rich guy, imagine what professionals could have done. Real professionals with an ideology, with an agenda, with brains.
At least twice or 3 times per year we are able to capture radioactive material. If you are wealthy enough and if you are patient enough, you will successfully find radioactive materials on the territory of former Soviet Union.
Once you've moved the highly enriched uranium, you could use any number of ports in the Middle East or the Mediterranean to ship the HEU to your destination. smuggling highly enriched uranium into the United States is pretty straightforward. Lead pipe will shield the HEU. The detector would have to be within a few inches to pick up any radiation. And then hide it amongst everyday goods.
A 100 pounds of highly enriched uranium is smaller than a football. It would fit in a six-pack of beer cans.
100,000 shipping containers go to the United States every day.
Every way that drugs come to New York City would be the same way you would imagine highly enriched uranium coming. If you have any doubt about the ability of Al-Qaeda to bring highly enriched uranium into the U.S., they could always hide it in a bale of marijuana.
Terrorism is just one threat, the deliberate threat. But there's also the unintentional threat of a nuclear detonation by accident, by error, or by misjudgment. We like to think the U.S. military or other militaries that control nuclear weapons are perfect organizations. They will never fail. We expect them to have 100% reliability. But even the well-disciplined, very professional United States military made very serious mistakes with nuclear weapons.
An atomic bomb breaks loose from a mounting shackle in a B-47 jet over Florence, South Carolina, causing a sensational freak accident.
A B-52 bomber was loaded with nuclear weapons by mistake.
An American warplane flew 1,500 miles across the nation, we're told, with 6 nuclear warheads on board.
And nobody knew, not the aircraft's crew, not the commanders on the ground.
We've had B-52s explode in the air during a refueling mission, causing the 4 thermonuclear weapons to fall onto Spanish territory and into the Mediterranean.
A B-52 bomber carrying nuclear weapons crashed near a U.S. Air Force base in Greenland, scattering deadly plutonium over the ice cap.
In 1960, a Beaumark air defense missile exploded, melting the nuclear warhead. In 1968, the USS Scorpion sank 400 miles southwest of the Azores. The nuclear weapons on board were never found. A B-47 bomber disappeared over the Mediterranean. Nuclear weapons aboard were never located. In 1959, an aircraft crashed near Whidbey Island, Washington. The nuclear depth charges were not recovered. A Skyhawk strike aircraft carrying a nuclear weapon rolled off an aircraft carrier in the Sea of Japan. The weapon was never recovered. There are many ways in which efforts to make a system more reliable actually backfire and make it less reliable. Sometimes we add a redundant system. We add backup systems, so that if one fails, another can take its place. But complexity is the enemy of reliability, because as you add systems to make them more complex, it's harder to understand all the potential interactions.
that unlikely, bizarre interaction where one person interacts with another in a way that wasn't anticipated, or one backup system interacts with another in ways that you can't figure out ahead of time and therefore can't plan around. Those are what caused the problems. In 1961, the B-52 broke apart in midair over Goldsboro, North Carolina, causing 2 nuclear bombs to fall. One parachute functioned properly, and that bomb survived with minor damage. The other parachute failed to open. When that bomb hit, 5 of 6 safety devices malfunctioned. A single switch prevented a nuclear explosion. When I worked in the Pentagon, I believed that the likelihood of a nuclear weapons accident in the United States occurring was very low. I still believe that. But low probability events happen. They happen all the time. There's a first time in history for every event. Eventually, those low probability events will occur.
That's supposed to happen?
Well, you can probably list every country in the world today.
Woo! How many countries do I think have nuclear weapons?
List them?
China.
I don't think I signed up for this.
Russia.
США.
UK, maybe?
英国.
America, I'm guessing.
美国.
Oh, us. Oh, that was a given.
France.
Germany.
Australia.
Canada? I don't think Canada.
No.
Латинской Америки не знаю.
Japan.
日本.
No, not Japan.
There's more. I know there's more.
Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia.
印度、巴基斯坦.
All other countries that's just not telling us they have them.
Afghanistan?
North Korea?
North Korea. Do they? Okay, North Korea.
还真说不好，这还真说不好。
Who knows? Who knows exactly?
I don't know. I'm out.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After the United States detonated the first atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert, nuclear technology began to spread. And other countries began to acquire their own nuclear bombs.
В экспансионистских кругах Соединенных Штатов Америки распространилась новая религия – вера в секрет атомной бомбы, хотя этого секрета давно уже не существует.
Great credit is due for this mighty British achievement, for it seems that by the possession of such deadly weapons, peace can be maintained in this troubled world. At Regan, deep in the Sahara, France goes forward with the detonation of her first atomic bomb. The explosion carries France a step further towards General de Gaulle's dream of national glory restored.
This is a gigantic success of Mao Zedong's thought. Our nation's first nuclear test surpasses the levels of the first nuclear tests of the United States, Britain, and France. Their criminal attempts to block and prevent our nation's people from grasping nuclear weapons have been thoroughly smashed. Pakistan, which has often been at war with India, hinted it now might have to join the once select nuclear community in self-defense, and warned membership of the nuclear club will not stop at 6.
One Prime Minister of Pakistan said that Pakistan would build a nuclear weapon even if it meant that the people had to eat grass.
We will make the bomb even if we have to eat grass.
In Karachi, they poured into the streets, holding a symbol of the power they're celebrating. The bomb has become a huge source of national pride.
Total jubilation in the streets of Pakistan. The first time we've achieved something which places us in the ranks of very, very few countries of the world. We were proud of our scientists, we were proud of our capabilities, we were proud of our strength. People thought that now let India do anything to Pakistan. Let's see what they do.
I had North Korean officials say to me, the lesson they took away from the toppling of Saddam Hussein was that Saddam was ousted because he didn't have a bomb. They were not going to let the same thing happen to Kim Jong-il. Therefore, they needed to have a bomb. North Korea is scared of disappearing into what the communists used to call the dustbin of history, like all their other communist friends, and they see nukes as the one thing that makes them the country that is taken seriously by the United States and the other big players in the neighborhood.
Every country has enemies. Every country can use self-defense as a rationale for acquiring nuclear weapons. But if every country does so, it is a much more dangerous world.
When you see something that is technically sweet, you do it. That is the way it was with the atomic bomb.
The father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, gave some frank answers to important questions in 1947.
I have been asked whether, in the years to come, it will be possible to kill 40 million American people in the 20 largest American towns by the use of atomic bombs in a single night. I am afraid that the answer to that question is yes. I have been asked whether there is hope for the nation's security in keeping secret some of the knowledge which has gone into the making of the bombs. I am afraid there is no such hope.
A nuclear weapon, in a sense, is the most simple configuration of nuclear material that you can imagine. You just bring together a certain quantity of fissile material, highly enriched uranium or plutonium, and if you do it right, it will explode.
The design of the first atom bomb was a very deep secret. In fact, that was a time when people didn't even know whether a bomb was possible. Now, the making of the atom bomb has become much easier.
For those who say building a nuclear weapon is easy, they're very wrong. For those who say building a crude device is very difficult, they are more wrong. Would you agree with that statement?
I won't comment on that statement.
All right, okay.
People from the U.S. nuclear weapons laboratories were testifying in a classified session to Congress, and they said that it would be possible to make a nuclear bomb with all the parts being commercially available except for the actual nuclear material.
Senator Biden asked the heads of the 3 weapons labs, is this possible? Is it really possible that terrorists could do this? And they said, yes. And they said, this is something that we test our graduate students on from time to time. We take 2 graduate students who haven't been prepared for doing this. We tell them, see if you can make a bomb that would work. Lo and behold, most of them passed this test.
Biden said, prove it. And so they went and made a nuclear bomb with everything other than the nuclear material from commercial parts. They actually brought it in to the classified hearing room in the Senate.
Typically, an implosion bomb would have something like 25 kilograms of uranium, which is about the size of a grapefruit. If, let's say, between 70 and 100 kilograms of HEU is available, then the design is not a major factor. It would not be very efficient. It would not use all the uranium that was used in it, and yet it could be enough to level a city.
During my 10 years as Prime Minister, what I really noticed was that it was actually the threat of the proliferation, the fact that these weapons could fall into other people's hands, that was the thing that troubled me, that kept me awake at night.
In the capital Islamabad, word hit the streets in early afternoon. Another nuclear device tested successfully.
As Pakistan celebrated, the public hailed A.Q. Khan as the father of the Islamic bomb.
In 1974, A.Q. Khan was working at a company that was developing a brand new process for enriching uranium. He stole their designs and took the list of all their suppliers. At the end of the day, he's not really a master scientist, but he's a master smuggler and a master organizer. He knows how to get the pieces out of the countries and how to find stuff and buy stuff.
There was this whole clandestine apparatus that was set up by the intelligence services, by the army, and by Dr. Khan. Restrictions were placed, sanctions were placed, but somehow the Pakistanis got around that. And the formal help actually came from India's enemy, China. China gave a blueprint of a nuclear bomb to Pakistan.
Somewhere around the early 1980s, Khan makes contact with the Iranians, who are very interested in getting a bomb, but clearly don't have the scientific or industrial capacity to do it themselves. And thus he starts on a commercial enterprise. Khan has got a full marketing regime laid out with brochures and videotapes to offer his nuclear wares.
It's extremely lucrative business. He had extensive contacts, networks, and he didn't much care about who the ultimate client was going to be.
He contacted Iran, North Korea, Libya, but he didn't just give them the technologies, he also took the bomb designs that the Pakistanis had and threw those in as a sweetener. He gave them 24/7 technology support. Got a problem? Call 1-800-AQ-KHAN. It was a full-service operation.
U.S. intelligence began to focus on A.Q. Khan in the late 1990s. The home run was in December 2003 with Libya.
The CIA and British intelligence essentially caught the Khan network red-handed, selling a full-scale nuclear weapon to Libya.
If it wasn't for A.Q. Khan, Libya never would have gotten the centrifuges that they've now thankfully given up. If it wasn't for A.Q. Khan, there wouldn't be an Iranian nuclear program. Iran is the tip of the spear. It's the big problem that we have to solve. They promised not to build nuclear weapons. But the problem is that the very same centrifuges, the very same factory that can enrich uranium to low quantities for nuclear fuel, can enrich it to high quantities for nuclear weapons. So the question is, do you trust Iran? By their own admission, they deceived inspectors about their nuclear activities for 17 years.
راجع به این مسئله گفتم خب شما خودتون اینو درست کردید. میگیم آقا شما که به چه حقی میخواد ما رو محدود کنید؟ اگه چیز خوبی است خب ما هم داشتیم. چرا شما فقط داشته باشید؟ اگه بده شما چرا دارید؟
Without question, Iran is trying to get a nuclear bomb. They've made that very clear, despite their promises that they were only pursuing civilian, peaceful objectives for their nuclear program. They're really good at trying to bring things in that can be used for their nuclear program. The Iranians have worked very hard at disguising and hiding their facilities. Many of their facilities are in crowded urban areas and underground, extremely well protected from any sort of aerial bombing.
If Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons capability, the impact is across the whole of the region. You will get a whole set of other countries deciding they've got to acquire nuclear weapons capability.
Syria, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, the rivals of the Iranian Shia state, would match their capabilities, and we would go from a Middle East with one nuclear-armed nation, Israel, to one with 3, 4, or 5 nuclear-armed nations.
They are surrounded by very unstable regimes and countries. If Iran acquires everything it needs, without doubt, pieces of that become more readily available to terrorist organizations like Hamas.
The risk that you have today with a regime like Iran or North Korea is they are prepared to start trading that nuclear weapons capability and technology.
The Pakistanis had the nuclear know-how. They didn't have the delivery system. The North Koreans had the missile and didn't have the nuclear know-how. So there was a natural convergence of interests here. The North Koreans have a long track record of selling military technology and missiles to the Syrians, to the Iranians, to the Iraqis, to the Pakistanis. They don't really have any other exports. Daily life is very grim. Food is in short supply. You drive around the capital, Pyongyang, at night, and it's basically dark. There's a famous satellite photo that shows the Korean peninsula, and in the south you see all these lights, and then it's just black.
We are still dealing with his years of unchecked activity and contacts, and it really is a genie out of the bottle that cannot be easily put back.
We've spent billions of dollars putting in radiation detectors, but highly enriched uranium is easily shielded. If you are depending on portal monitors to defend a city against a nuclear detonation, you have done far too much too late. Nuclear weapons don't have to be exactly on target. Close is good enough. If a terrorist thinks that the portal monitor might detect the weapon, they set it off in the port.
Highly enriched uranium is easy to smuggle. The radiation is very weak. The detectors that we're putting in place now would have no chance of detecting highly enriched uranium in a cargo container.
The signature from highly enriched uranium is so slight that they have to set the monitors very high to detect it. And so they're getting thousands of false alarms every day. Toilets will set it off. China, porcelain.
Ceramics, stone, like granites, a lot of biological materials like tobacco and some algae. Televisions, the old-style televisions, kitty litter, a lot of chemical products, and a lot of other stuff also.
You want to smuggle a bomb into the United States? Ship it in a truck with kitty litter. No one would ever find it.
They're great for really radioactive stuff, like cesium or something that might be used in a dirty bomb. But for the stuff that you would use to make a nuclear bomb that would incinerate the heart of a major city, they're not going to detect that.
Robert Oppenheimer, in 1946, he appeared in a closed session of the Senate. And one of the senators asked him if nuclear terrorism was a potential threat. He said, of course. And terrorists could bring a bomb into New York City and destroy the city. Somebody asked him, how would you stop it? He said, with a screwdriver, to open up every container that comes into the city.
Once you've smuggled the highly enriched uranium into the US, you will need a place to build the bomb. The bomb could be built right in the target city. The hard part was what we did in 1945. The hard part is doing it the first time. This is no longer a conceptual challenge. There's no trick. There's no magic that needs to be figured out. It's really just an engineering challenge. It's definitely not rocket science. Rocket science is hard.
You can make a very simple weapon, a so-called gun-type weapon, which was the one used in Hiroshima.
And it was so simple, we didn't even test it before we dropped it. It is essentially just a gun barrel. You have a target, and you have a projectile, and you propel the projectile into the target. You'll need an artillery gun to fire one piece of HEU at the other, which would be bolted onto the muzzle of the gun. The military sells these things as surplus, but they sell them disabled. You would have to make the gun capable of shooting again, and you'd want to test fire the gun to make sure that it fired the projectile at the right speed. This is the only thing that you would need to do off-site.
You would need a group of people, let's say between 15 to 20 to 25, who would be knowledgeable in particular aspects of weapons design, of explosives.
2 or 3 people to do the machining, 2 or 3 people to work on the gun, 2 or 3 people to work on electronics, people who are experts in ballistics.
People who know something about nuclear physics. You need the machinists and the metallurgists to make your pieces into the right shape and make sure they all fit together.
Ordinary explosives and detonators, maybe some electronic equipment.
You could go online and easily find the lathe for $10,000. You can find the furnace for about $50,000. And you can even find a surplus recoilless rifle, probably also for $10,000.
More than 90% of the effort in the Manhattan Project was making the nuclear material to make the nuclear bomb. If you can get hold of that nuclear material, then it doesn't take a Manhattan Project to make a bomb.
If the circumstances are right, acquiring a complete bomb may be easier than building one. In Algeria in 1961, officers within the French military revolted and tried to seize a nuclear weapon. As the rebels closed in, the weapon was detonated in a degraded explosion to prevent it from falling into the hands of the rebelling officers. The Japanese death terror cult, Aum Shinrikyo, attempted to buy a nuclear bomb in the Soviet Union.
They had a lot of resources. We're talking well over $1 billion of assets. And secondly, they had tremendous access. At one point, the group had more members in Russia and the former Soviet Union than they had in Japan.
In 1994, a senior leader made 8 trips to Russia. His personal notebook included a shopping list for buying a nuclear warhead for $15 million.
A perfectly secure nuclear weapon is also a perfectly unusable one. So here one has this paradox between security and usability.
Where's the most dangerous place in the world right now? For my money, it is Pakistan. You've got an unstable government, plus enough material for up to 100 nuclear weapons, plus Osama bin Laden in the country.
What we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years has been a spiral that is going downwards. Destabilization, the spread of the Taliban, the spread of radicalism, the collapse of the economy. So could there be a colonel's coup in Pakistan by Islamic radicals within the military? And then could nuclear weapons be at risk?
What happens if that country destabilizes? What happens if the army splits? Who gets the weapons? Who gets the material for the weapons? Who gets the scientists who know how to build the weapons?
There's no such thing as perfect command and control over nuclear weapons, even in the most sophisticated of arsenals. From the level of the president on down, there are human weaknesses, technical problems, deficiencies, and vulnerabilities. I was a launch officer for Minuteman missiles and spent 3 years in Montana in a hole in an underground launch control center. I was one of the guys responsible for getting these missiles off the ground in 1 minute. We didn't call them Minuteman missiles for nothing. When I was serving in the Air Force as a launch officer, there was a device in the Launch Control Center into which 12 digits had to be dialed in order to unlock the missiles for firing. This had been installed under Robert McNamara over the objections of the Strategic Air Command. Since they couldn't prevent the panel from being installed, the Strategic Air Command in Omaha had set these codes to 0, and we all knew it. That was the secret unlock code for firing our missiles. 12 zeros. In fact, in our launch checklist, we had to ensure that the unlock code was set to all zeros before we completed the launch sequence. This changed in 1977 when they started using actual codes. But until then, I and one other crew member could have actually formatted a launch order, a completely valid launch order, and transmitted it to the entire American strategic arsenal.
It looks like we're in a shooting war.
Oh, hell. All the Russians involved, sir?
Hendrik, that's all I've been told. I just came in on the red phone. My orders are for this base to be sealed tight, and that's what I mean to do, seal it tight. Now, I want you to transmit Plan R for Robert, to the wing. Plan R for Robert.
Is it that bad, sir?
Looks like it's pretty hairy.
Yes, sir.
I remember watching Dr. Strangelove and thinking they had it all wrong. You don't need to be a general. We were only lieutenants, but we could have started World War III just as easily as General Jack Ripper. We could have triggered implementation of the U.S. nuclear war plan involving thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons fired at the Soviet Union in China.
Stand by. Message follows. Alpha, Tango, Golf, Lima.
The life of a launch officer is really kind of Pavlovian. You have been trained and conditioned so thoroughly, you kind of march lockstep into a very well-rehearsed script that's driven by checklists.
Step 1, launch keys inserted. Roger.
We would jump up, unlock our safe, take out codes. check the codes against the message, then proceed through a launch checklist that takes about 1 minute to carry out.
Let's enable the missiles. Program select switch, enable. Flight all, LFO. Unlock code inserted. Stand by. Unlock code inserted. Enable switch, enable. Enable.
At the end of that process, two of you turn keys and launch up to 50 missiles at the Soviet Union and/or China. Today, the posture of the United States and Russia is exactly the same as it was during the Cold War. So if the orders went down right now, 20 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it would take about 2 minutes to launch all of the U.S. nuclear ballistic missiles out of their tubes in the Midwest. About that length of time for the Russians to do the same, and then it would take another 10 to 12 minutes for everything else that's on launch ready alert to be fired. So that within 15 minutes, all of the forces on launch ready alert would be in the air on their flight to the other side of the planet. 2,000 bombs, strategic nuclear weapons, very high yield. And they could kill over 100 million Russians and Americans within 30 minutes.
When we were working on nuclear arms control, I found myself in a meeting in the Pentagon with a colonel. We got into a short exchange about this, and in this context of this exchange, he said, "But I don't understand what would be such a big deal if there were a nuclear exchange. Only about 500 million people would die. Life would go on afterwards." And I can remember having a feeling like Woody Allen in Annie Hall. I'm sorry, I've got an appointment back on planet Earth.
I don't think that anyone really knows how many nuclear weapons there are on the planet today.
Накопилось много.
I haven't got it.
Does anyone know that?
50, наверное.
100?
100个左右吧。
Maybe thousands. I don't know. Far more than I know.
几千多，应该也差不多。
6,000.
Ну, я думаю, более 10 тысяч, наверное, есть.
I don't know. 15,000.
20,000.
50,000?
100,000.
500,000.
There's enough nuclear firepower on one U.S. nuclear site to annihilate probably half the planet.
Достаточно, чтобы уничтожить Землю.
I've heard people say that we have enough nuclear weapons to create a new sun.
It only takes a couple to eliminate the city.
Do you know how many there are?
We estimate that there are about 23,000 nuclear weapons in the world still. The good news is there used to be 60,000, so we've cut those arsenals by more than half. But we, the United States, still has about 1,500 hydrogen bombs on missiles poised for launch in 15 minutes or less. The really bad news is the Russians have the same.
If the Russians fired missiles at the United States, the first warning would come from satellites, and they could detect the flame from the booster rocket within seconds, easily within a minute. Suddenly, this early warning hub in the United States would become very frenzied, to try to figure out whether this is a false alarm or whether this is a real attack, and determine this within 60 seconds. The president would receive a briefing from the duty officer at Strategic Command Headquarters. That briefing of the president, of his response options and their consequences, has to be delivered in as little as 30 seconds. The president normally would have no more than 12 minutes to make a decision, and maybe as little as 10 seconds.
I knew that if the Soviets did launch an attack, that it would take 26 minutes for an ICBM to leave Russian soil and land in Washington or New York, and I had that much time to decide how to respond.
И каждую минуту мы были на чеку, готовые дать ответный удар. И надо принимать решения. Иногда получается, они докладывают, что по срокам полета этих головок остаются считанные минуты.
The timeline was very short. He had just a few minutes to make a decision. How to respond, at what level of intensity. Somewhere before the 10th minute, the order to execute would be issued. The Strategic Air Command probably would be airborne already by then, just as a precaution. There might be a presidential evacuation so that the president would survive an attack on Washington. Although I know of cases in which the president chose not to be evacuated. And roughly by the 28th minute at the latest, those of us not evacuated would be dead.
For us, it was a kind of suicide duty. Any missile landing within half a mile of our location would probably have killed us. If we had survived the attack, we were supposed to go to a designated rendezvous point. Our air would only last 24 hours. So we'd go out through an escape tube, which was filled with sand. We'd have to release the bolts on the cover and let the sand fall through, and then crawl up the tube. Our tube came up under the parking lot, so we would have to break through the asphalt to get out. The rendezvous point might be 50 or 100 miles away, and you'd have to walk. Didn't really matter, though. Everyone knew the radiation would kill us quickly anyway, and you'd never make it to the rendezvous.
In 1995, Pete Sampras won the US Open and Wimbledon. George Clooney made his first big movie. A bomb destroyed the federal building in Oklahoma City. O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murder, and we also came close to an accidental nuclear missile launch.
On January 25th, 1995, the United States launched a rocket from Norway to study the Northern Lights. We told the Russians that we were going to launch that rocket, but somebody in Moscow forgot to pass word on it. When they picked up the 4 stages of this rocket, they initially interpreted this as 4 warheads from a U.S. nuclear submarine, which we often station off the coast of Norway, possibly directed at Moscow.
that fit exactly the characteristics of the beginning of a nuclear strike. One missile coming over, exploding in the atmosphere, sending out an electromagnetic pulse that would fry all the electronics, radars, surveillance, computers in the country to be attacked, followed by an onslaught of nuclear weapons. And for the first time in the nuclear age, the Russians actually opened up the nuclear football. They went to President Yeltsin, they opened up the command and control launch codes, the button, put it on the desk, and said, we're under attack.
Boris Yeltsin was basically given 5 minutes to decide what to do.
Fortunately, Yeltsin wasn't drunk, and he didn't believe what the military was telling him. He said there must be some mistake.
Both the US and Russia guide their nuclear response with the doctrine called launch on warning. It is the policy that if you believe you're under attack, you're supposed to launch your missiles. You don't wait for them to land. According to Russian military doctrine, Boris Yeltsin should have launched an all-out nuclear attack on the United States that morning. We don't know what happened in the Kremlin. All we know is that he didn't.
There have been a number of false alarms during the Cold War. We've had occasions when the rising moon was interpreted to be a Russian ICBM attack. A flock of geese was thought to be bombers. A training tape was slipped in to a computer at our command and control headquarters at NORAD. Everyone involved thought there was an actual attack underway.
A tape was inserted into the early warning hub in Colorado that simulated a large-scale Soviet nuclear attack, and no one realized that it was just a training tape until the United States had gone into this sort of frenzied checklist procedure to prepare for nuclear war. Airborne command posts actually, in some cases, took off. The president's doomsday plane actually left its base in preparation for an incoming Soviet strike. Senator Charles Percy happened to be there at the time and said there was absolute panic. Another false alarm was caused by a computer chip malfunction that generated indications of a large-scale Soviet attack. We raised the alert levels. Crews took launch codes out of their safes. They inserted keys into the launch switches.
Zbigniew Brzezinski was woken up in the middle of the night with the assured instruction that a nuclear attack was underway, and he had to go wake up President Carter.
There was 8 minutes worth of nuclear launch preparations that were triggered by a malfunctioning computer chip that cost less than $1.
You know, having missiles on hair trigger is an accident waiting to happen. You know, as Fermi said about physics, you know, what isn't forbidden is compulsory, will eventually happen. There's nothing that makes the launch of nuclear weapons impossible. If the probability isn't zero, it will happen.
Right now, the world has policy that is based heavily on technology denial. You keep something secret and you call it a day. but secrecy has a half-life. Things leak out. Centrifuges happen to be the technology that is going to change the game. They are going to democratize the process of building nuclear weapons. Uranium exists everywhere on Earth. It's more common than tin. 99.3% of all uranium is uranium-238, the isotope that cannot be used for nuclear weapons. It's that 0.7% that you need to separate out. A centrifuge, it's basically a tube. It spins the uranium in gas form, and it pushes the heavier atoms towards the wall, and the lighter atoms towards the center, and you can skim off the light atoms. And you do this over and over and over again, many dozens of times. And eventually you purify it to a level that you can use in a bomb. The common wisdom is that they're very complicated. Technologies that take countries decades to build and are the highest achievements. But the fact is that centrifuges are 1950s technology. And this is 2010. Enriching uranium is still beyond the reach of the individual. It's a logistical feat requiring thousands of centrifuges working for months or years. But highly enriched uranium is now within the grasp of really any country. And once you have the HEU, making a crude bomb is easy.
Какая дьявольская сила. Все сносится, все. Ничего на пути нет такого, чтобы могло препятствовать. Здорово, вообще говоря, поработали в Рейкьявике.
We're not just discussing limits on a further increase of nuclear weapons. We seek instead to reduce their number. We seek the total elimination one day of nuclear weapons from the face of the earth.
Первым сказал президент Рейган, и я сказал ему о своем таком же мнении. И мы понимали хорошо с президентом Рейганом, что нам нельзя допустить провала этой встречи. Не получилось. И они сказали, что это провал. Поэтому я с грустью смотрю на этот период. И сейчас уже можно говорить о том, что более 40 стран располагает возможностями создать ядерное оружие. Вот на этом закончилось, и мы разошлись. Рейкьявик открыл дорогу, и мы действительно за горизонт заглянули.
first millionth of a second, the fireball is 500 feet across. Within 10 seconds, it would grow to over 1 mile.
The temperature would rise to 20 million degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the sun. The blast would generate winds in excess of 650 miles an hour. Forces of that magnitude can destroy anything that people can build.
Strongest buildings would be reduced to rubble. Tens of square blocks would just be melted, would just be evaporated.
Everything would be vaporized. The buildings, the cars, the trees, the people, the upper level of the earth itself.
There were 76,000 buildings in Hiroshima. 70,000 of them were destroyed. The hospitals, the fire stations, the communication equipment, the military installations, everything just flattened.
The first 5 to 6 miles, virtually everyone in that 5-mile radius is going to die. Somewhere between 3 and 4 million people dead immediately in the first 5 miles.
If you're lucky enough to be 8 or 9 miles away from the blast, then you would experience it as blast effects, windows being shattered.
Big enough to shatter every window and turn it into hundreds of missiles flying outward from the center of the explosion at speeds more than 100 miles per hour.
After the blast, it's the firestorms that would just combust everything in
Everything
sight.
flammable would burn. Paper, cardboard, cloth, heating oil, gasoline, everything would ignite.
Whole blocks would catch fire.
Hundreds of thousands of fires would coalesce into a giant firestorm, 11 miles across.
Everything catches on fire, then there's no air to breathe.
All the oxygen would be consumed, and everyone would die.
It is useless to talk about will you die because you're burned to death or because you've been blown to bits by the blast.
Anyone looking in the direction of the nuclear explosion, they will be blinded.
Lungs ruptured by the pressures, or eardrums ruptured by the pressure. Crush injuries from buildings falling onto them, or broken bones when they've been thrown through the air against buildings.
Hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions, would die from the fallout.
The body does have a repair rate for radiation, but the doses are so heavy and coming so quickly that it will overwhelm the body's repair mechanisms. The 450 to 700 rad dose kills you because it wipes out your blood cells. Over 3,000 rads, you will go into seizures, immediate coma, and you will die within a matter of minutes to hours.
Most of the doctors are going to be dead. Most of the nurses are going to be dead. Most of the hospitals are going to be destroyed. Huge numbers of casualties and no medical equipment.
There will be a need for antibiotics, tens of units of blood per person.
There won't be any electrical power.
Vast amounts of intravenous fluid to sustain people who've been burned, just burned.
You couldn't treat all the burn victims.
And then at a certain point, the casualties become so high, it's pointless to try to make any sense out of it. The doctor in the Red Cross hospital who turns into an automaton, binding, swabbing, daubing, binding, swabbing, daubing. And that's what descended on the physicians and nurses in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Someone would surely claim they had 10 more that were already hidden somewhere, and they'd start setting them off unless their demands were met.
Every other big city is going to wonder whether they might be a target.
Public panic, people fleeing major cities. You could forget about rules about search and seizure. You're going to have to be searching everywhere. You can forget about civil liberties when people realize a whole city was just destroyed.
You take the Bill of Rights, you put it up on a shelf, and you might never see it again. People would be demanding draconian measures to make sure that another city didn't go up.
Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him, takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.
The Cuban Missile Crisis endangered the very existence of our nation. We came that close to nuclear war. Neither the Soviets nor we, the U.S., intended to put our nations at that risk. And the next time, we may not be so lucky.
They kill by the millions. They kill in numbers that the human imagination simply cannot comprehend.
I used to think, well, we possess nuclear weapons in order to prevent their use. We now know we live in a world in which if we possess them, if anyone possesses them, they will be used.
I don't see any good that a nuclear weapon could do or bring to the world.
In my opinion, you can forget them.
I think they should be destroyed.
I think we'd be better off without them.
There's 183 countries in the world that do not have nuclear weapons. Many of these countries could have nuclear weapons. They've chosen not to.
We've decided to take a 180-degree turn in South Africa. When I became president, I was then informed that we have completed 6 devices, more or less comparable to the bombs which were actually used at Hiroshima. I indicated that I would like us to stop this program and to become part of the mainstream in the world again.
The only way to eliminate the threat of nuclear terrorism is to eliminate all nuclear weapons in all countries.
We've got to ensure that never once do terrorists succeed in detonating a nuclear weapon.
When you think about nuclear security, it's all about the material. The simple physical fact is that if you don't have fissile material, either highly enriched uranium or plutonium, for example, then you cannot have a nuclear weapon. The focus is all about the material. Stop making new material. Secure the material where you know it is around the world, and make sure that you detect illicit transfer of material, and then start getting rid of the material you have.
Today in the world we have about 1,700 tons of HU. So that's enough material for, the order of 50 to 100,000 weapons, and to really create a truly international system for these facilities.
International fuel banks or international reprocessing centers. That'd be a much safer world.
We haven't lost an ounce of gold from Fort Knox. We shouldn't lose an ounce of plutonium or highly enriched uranium.
During the Cold War, I believed in the value of nuclear weapons to deter an attack. 20 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there's no excuse any longer for keeping nuclear weapons on launch-ready alert. We can remove all of the warheads on our missiles, share our safeguards technology, and establish a joint warning center to ensure nuclear war cannot happen by mistake.
When I came into government in the early 1980s, the idea that within about 10 years, both sides would have agreed to a 50% reduction in their nuclear weapons would have sounded absurd. But we achieved it. That means a reduction of more than 5,000 nuclear warheads apiece. We have gone almost 20 years now without any really demonstrative steps to nuclear reductions.
This has to be a step-by-step process. That's how we did it with chemical weapons. These weapons are now taboo.
The Soviet Union imploded when I was Secretary of State. Then we actually got an enforceable treaty where we got Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons. All countries in the world have to sign a legally binding, intrusively verifiable agreement to rid the world of nuclear weapons.
The choice we face is eliminating nuclear weapons or living in a world with 25 or 30 nuclear powers. We can do this. There has to be a carefully orchestrated process of reductions. The United States and Russia, with 96% of the world's nuclear weapons, have to lead the way.
We're starting in a world where there are 23,000 nuclear weapons. The very first step is to cut those arsenals dramatically in the United States and Russia. Once you get down to low hundreds in the world, then you will have built up the confidence and the mechanisms to ensure that you can verify this process so that we can get rid of the last one.
None. Should be zero.
I say zero.
坚决废除它.
Я думаю, что вообще не должно быть.
Never have
We'd
it.
rather not have them, I think.
Наверное, вообще не должно быть.
Не должно быть вообще.
None. None. Zero. Zero.
No nuclear weapons. Zero.
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 No country should have.
The optimum number is none.
Ideal will be zero. Zero nuclear weapons.
Ноль. Ноль. А вот сейчас я с другой стороны. Новое поколение вместо болтовни занимается серьезной работой. Это все позволяет нам надеяться, что может возродиться этот процесс.
We've taken important steps forward to increase nuclear security and to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. This starts with the reduction of our own nuclear arsenals. This legally binding treaty will be completed this year.
The arms control agreements we negotiated between the United States and then Soviet Union, you think these were independent initiatives taken by governments. But the fact is public opinion had a big role to play in the process.
President Kennedy, after he passed the Limited Test Ban Treaty, and whenever he mentioned it on the stump afterwards, he got thunderous applause, and he quipped, "If I had known it was so popular, I would have done it a long time ago."
Elimination of nuclear weapons has not yet been agreed to by the political leaders of the world. It's a revolutionary idea, but they can be eliminated.
We have to change our way of thinking. And if we can't change our way of thinking, we won't survive. It's that simple. I've changed my thinking, and millions of other people are changing their thinking, and frankly, if you've never changed your mind about something, I say, pinch yourself. You may be dead.